problem is often overlooked in apocalyptic movies, TV shows that could kill you. Green Dalsted said. Diarrhea. So many things can cause it, and it used to be, well, still is in the least developed countries, quite lethal, mostly for babies and children. Welfare Peanut Butter said. I feel like Stephen King addressed this a bit in the expanded version of The Stand. People who survived the plague, like 0.001% of the people on Earth, but managed to die because of an infection, or suicide, or getting too drunk and falling into the pool. I think it would be the little, random things that might be cause for an urgent care visit currently, but could turn potentially deadly very quickly. Jungleman6 said. I've only read one post-apocalypse series where the author addressed pests. In the series most of the world dies from a plague, so there are millions of dead bodies everywhere. Which leads to rats and ants experiencing a catastrophic population boom. They watch a group go to enter a house, only for a tidal wave of rats to flood out and overwhelm them as they try to run away. They need medical supplies, so they go to the hospital and have to wear basically spacesuits because of the trillions of ants that are in there cleaning up the piles of dead bodies. For those asking, the series is called Viral Misery by Thomas Watson. Nakano said. Well, this might help if you score something between -0.5D and -2.0D myopia. How high are the probabilities of finding corpses with -6.5D short-sightedness glasses? Not sure if this made sense. English is not my first language and I never learned the proper terms about short-sightedness. 1i73RZ said. Clean bullet holes. Next episode everyone is a-okay half the time, and off to murder more zombies before cannibalizing the next group. Your shirt alone would be filthy enough to cause mild chafing, which in turn would cause infection. But everyone's weights are wider than mine, and bullet holes and axe wounds heal up just fine with our state-of-the-art medical facility and dry cleaning services. FJ333 said. The best part about this trope is the little metal bowl they always have to toss the bullet into with a satisfying little clink. No matter where it is, when it is, or who it is performing the bulletectomy, they always have that special little bowl, always shiny clean metal, somewhere within arm's reach. I get so giddy every time the bullet removal scenes start. I'm all, where's the bowl? When do we get to see the bowl? I want to see that motherfucking bullet roll around that motherfucking bowl. I can't wait to hear that satisfying clink. And the camera never fails to focus on the bowl for this exciting moment. It's a bullet. You've given birth to a healthy baby bullet. God, I hate tropes. I hate even more the fact that some otherwise really good films written and directed by really talented people embrace such silly traditions. Just why? See also, guns that click loudly every time you look at them or touch them or move them, and also guns that make their victims fly across the room. Admittedly, those last two don't even really gel with reality, the very last one even breaking physics. In defense of the shiny metal bullet bowl clink, at least that one is just sort of absurd in a harmless way. Doesn't really defy reality, just believability and coincidence. Hoverjet said. 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. Of course this depends on the person, location, climate, and other circumstances. Some could last longer, others shorter. Edit. Yes, I forgot about the shelter part. That's a good one. As others have pointed out, this is a general rule meant to show what should be prioritized. It's not an exact science. There are a lot of other variables at play. Admiral Akbar once said, as bad as the show Revolution's overall plotting and pacing was, they generally did a good job of thinking about these kinds of little inconsistencies. There's a minor character who was a doomsday prepper before the apocalypse, but he didn't stock up enough on antibiotics. As a result, his daughter died of tetanus that he was unable to treat. A warlord kidnaps prisoners for blood because his wife has diabetes and needs constant transfusions of blood with sufficient insulin in it to survive. There's a doctor who keeps a collection of moldy fruit to harvest penicillium mold from it and make penicillin. Some characters try to go into an old subway tunnel, but nearly die because of lack of sufficient airflow down there without modern HVAC systems. Father Kerosene said. That also happens in complete darkness. If you can manage to create a completely pitch black environment, see how long you can sit there before you start seeing things. It really doesn't take long. Bonus points if you have noise-canceling earmuffs plugs. Edit. You Eternal Eagle Eye has informed me this effect is called Prisoner Cinema, in case you'd like to read about it further. Looking Gatayao said. I used to live in Florida. There is a very obvious change in the overall atmosphere when a hurricane is incoming. For about a day ahead, the climate becomes suspiciously comfortable. No sun, cool air, very little humidity. A few hours before landfall, the ocean starts to push its way inland, even up into the rivers. I also lived in Missouri for about a year and the signs of tornado weather are pretty easy to spot as well. Everything just feels and looks wrong. The sky is an obscene shade of green, the drop in air pressure is so sudden that you can feel it with your skin. You know the actual tornado is coming because it goes from windy to slack air. Even if you'd never heard of a tornado in your life, you'd know that something terrible was about to happen. I knew a guy who lived in Arizona and I had thought about living there one time and so I asked him a lot of questions. It's just taken for granted that you get the hell away from a riverbed when the rain starts really dropping. Thunderintus said. Some classic books include, Alas Babylon, Surviving Nuclear War in Small Town Florida, Ridley Walker, English Civilization Centuries After a War, On the Beach, Australia Slowly Dies from the Fallout of a Northern War, A Canticle for Leibowitz, Monks Survive Nuclear War, Until the Next One, War Day, Journalists Interview Americans Who Survived a War, Zone 1, Cleaning Out of the Zombies Who Have Overrun New York, Lucifer's Hammer, A Meteor Hits the West Coast of America, The Lathe of Heaven, A Man Discovers That His Dreams Can Change Reality, The Girl with All the Gifts The Boy on the Bridge, Fungus Turns People into Zombies, Fail Safe, The U.S. Bombs Moscow by Accident, and Offers to Destroy an American City as Payment, The Road. A man leads his son through the hellscape of a destroyed country, Earth abides, the few survivors of a plague try to rebuild their lives. DJ33 said. Alas Babylon. I've never seen this book referenced by anyone ever, but it's the only book that I read during my middle high school years that I remember actually enjoying. I don't even remember how I picked it up. I know it was for a school project, but I also remember that it wasn't an assigned book. Nobody else read it. Thinking back, it's possible we might have been given a list of acceptable books for the project and I picked it because it was first alphabetically or something. That said, I learned nothing from this moment of epiphany and went back to ignoring books until my mid-20s. Alas Babylon does have a good entry for this thread though, which is, salt. One of the only things I remember about the book after this long is that they made a huge deal out of salt and how fucked they would have been without access to it. Matt the Freeman said. I always see post-apocalypses media showing people going into cities to scavenge for supplies, but honestly cities are the places you want to avoid at all costs to this reason. There is a reason why we bury dead bodies, why every culture has a tradition of getting rid of bodies. They are a vessel for disease, smell, animals get to them, any body left out too long is going to be harder and harder to dispose. Cities would be full of these meat bombs. What's worse is shows usually show survivors winding up finding a body and go, oh that's too bad. No, you'd smell that sucker in an unventilated, humid house which the cadaver has been sitting for God knows how long. You won't be able to survive in most houses with a body like that bloating the area. Not even mention the absolute psychological damage seeing a body like that would do to people. Most would think they could be tough and push through that, but the only corpses we see on the regular are beautified up. These will be long dead denizens who have been rotting for a time. Multiply that throughout the city, and scavenging inside city limits becomes a midfield of smell and disease and psychological trauma. Obama's Ty said. There's a little moment in The Last of Us where one of the main character's friends, a mechanic, gives him a siphon hose in order to get gas from old cars. He even says to him you'd be surprised how many cars still got gas in them. To clarify, the game takes place 20 years after the world collapses, so any gas that's still left, well, anywhere, would be useless. And it's a mechanic of all people telling you this, so that was one little detail that bothered me. Beat Break said. I don't know how this hasn't been mentioned yet, but it's common sense that is almost always overlooked in movies and TV. Humans are way more physically fragile and squishy than you might think. Based on John McClane and other invincible action heroes, who take damage and do things that would break or catastrophically cripple a normal person, Movies are a poor source of information for deciding what to do and what could happen to your body, should you somehow falsely think you're the main protagonist of an apocalypse movie. Indoor firefight without hearing protection? You're probably deaf now. Jumping off a building to catch a wire? Kiss your fingers and/or lower extremities goodbye, assuming you land on your feet. Taking a beer bottle to the head? That's probably a concussion. Movies have made us think we're a lot more durable than we really are. Kiyahara said. Fresh, clean water. While it might look clear, most streams in the US have nasty chemicals in them or else full of bacteria that we're not used to drinking. If you don't purify it, and that requires more than just boiling or running through a Brita filter, you will likely get sick. That right there might kill you. America runs on a system of resupply where most things are stocked daily or weekly. We don't have warehouses full of spare parts or cans of food just waiting. If you miss out on the initial scrabble for food and equipment, you might be fucked forever. Getting a hardware store and all the tools and spare parts inside would be a godsend, as 90% of that is manufactured only as needed, so supply will dry up soon. Same goes for things like ammunition, medicine, and all preserved foods. Once the supply in shops and stores are gone, there won't be any more just lying out there. Not to mention it often has expiration dates, and if it sits too long can rot, become poison, or explode. Hey, even cans of food might explode if left to rot long enough. Had an old can of pineapples detonate in my cupboard a few years back. Never did get the smell out. As for food, better learn how to forage, farm, and hunt, as most farms now use proprietary seeds that will not produce viable seeds for the next crop. That way farmers keep buying seeds each year. So even if you found an empty farmer's field, unless you can find viable seeds, next year you won't have shit. Same goes for fruit trees. You can't just spit out seeds and expect to have plants next year. Agriculture is a lot harder, especially in large enough quantities to feed groups, than the backyard vegetable garden. Mazendel said. 6. Childbirth. Giving birth in the absence of modern healthcare will be a massive risk for any woman, and any woman having sex will probably have no way to avoid it since contraceptives won't last. Also, child mortality will shoot up. This is a small plot point in the Black Tide Rising book series by John Ringo. The majority of survivors are on boats, going around and finding other boats, killing the zombies on them to loot anything they can, and rescue anybody that might be still alive. Considering the fall happened roughly in the span of a couple weeks, it wasn't intentionally released by a weapon. Most people that survived by getting locked into cargo spaces of things like warships and whatnot were all in a whelp. We're probably dead soon. Phase at roughly the same time. And a non-trivial portion of such groups with men, women, and a bit of privacy, decided to try and feel some small comfort by having sex. Such groups end up rescued and joining the main group. So the issue is a fairly substantial portion of their female population is pregnant with due dates that are largely spread across about 6 weeks. While they do have supplies and some trained doctors, the situation is less than ideal. Miss Sarah 101 said, when it comes to traveling, I have rarely seen anyone bother with a bicycle or any other human-powered transport in general. Sure, distances would be a pain in the ass, but it's a lot better at times than walking. When it comes to supplies, it would be easy to carry with attachments. I once DIY a bike basket with a random one with zip ties I got at a dollar store. A fellow cyclist actually attached 2 old shopping carts on the sides of their bike. I know, flat tires aren't a problem, just right on the rims. Hell, there are now bike tires that don't require air or those fix-a-flats. I went to get a few myself as I commonly bike to my job, which isn't that far. When it comes to how-to guides, libraries can be your best bet. I remembered reading an article on how libraries were one of the few places that were spared from raiders in a disaster and ended up saving lives thanks to having information on DIY medicine when there was no power. Team Broniel said, here is a tip for when we are caught in the inevitable apocalypses. Put your insulin in a watertight bag, Ziploc or something reliable. Place it in a flowing stream or spring out of the ground is best. Water stays cool when it's flowing, and spring water is around 52 even in hot states. It will more than protect the temperature of the insulin and will stay pretty constant year-round, unless you are in the very cold north. Assuming you got the supply, it will buy you a year. In that time we can work to contract with the local pig farmer to harvest a pig pancreases for its insulin, which is what they did before synthetic was invented. Salt not sugar said. Infection. Very common, and if untreated will kill. Lack of clean water. This can lead people to drink dirty water and get illnesses. Also carrying water is heavy. There is a reason civilizations were built close to rivers. Small injuries can prevent you from moving long distances. It can take days to heal from small wounds at best. Wolves. Any large predators can take you down if they are desperate. Illness. Can be caused by all kinds of issues but is more common if you're out in the elements constantly. Albert Normandy said. The fact that most people do not know how to grow food, much less preserve it. People 300 years ago knew how to process food at each step from seed to field to cellar. That knowledge is almost completely lost, at least in the Western world. People hoard guns thinking they are going to live off the land, but that isn't how it works. That big deer you kill will likely spoil before you eat it all. And wild animals are not numerous enough to support our populations, and we would quickly be reduced to eating rats and pigeons. In The Walking Dead they were growing tomatoes. That is a huge waste of space and resources. They need to focus on grain and potatoes. Tomatoes and broccoli have almost no calories. No time for such luxuries in an apocalypse. Jules 2106 said. Granted, I think that would be a fairly easy to solve problem in case of a disaster. I know it's usually not shown, and I don't like that filmmakers pretend it doesn't exist. It just isn't such a big deal. Cloth pans are very easy to make, even by hand, and as long as you have access to materials, water and ways to get it boiling, you'll never run out of pads. The bigger female-only question would be pregnancy, childbirth, in my opinion. Without appropriate medical care, giving birth is pretty dangerous to mom and child, not even taking post-birth recovery, plus the limited mobility and stamina during pregnancy into account. Depending on the environment, pregnancy would absolutely be a death sentence. Stuck with Thormer said. The stupidity of others. TV shows and movies leave out that during the zombie apocalypse, there will be a small but very vocal part of the population that insists it's all a hoax and refuse to follow any of the safety protocols. Did you barricade your town? One of these fools will go unlock the gates in the middle of the night just to prove there are no zombies, until they end up with their head in a zombie's jaws, lamenting the hoaxes and belatedly shouting for everyone to barricade their houses and towns. Gent PC said. Really, there are two that I can think of off the bat. In a recent Walking Dead episode they find a cache of MREs which quickly become part of the survivors' food supply. The current batch of episodes take place 10 years after the fall, and MREs, in ideal conditions, have a 5-year shelf life, and the conditions of TWD are less than ideal. The continued use of guns and the seeming ready availability of ammunition. Watching the early episodes of TWD they often employ the spray and pray method of shooting with long bursts and no aiming, which would eat up any ready supply of ammunition. Later episodes make it clear they are using reloads, which, though a reasonable explanation, adds more problems. Using modern equipment to measure out powder loads, etc., most firearms will function quite well. In the world of TWD with no electricity, the use of primitive tools, the subsequent reloads would have a 50/50 success rate, and some of the failures would be catastrophic. Read explosive. In addition, given the lack of refined powder and primers, the weapons the reloads were used on would quickly become fouled, leading to more failures, and would need the attention of a skilled gunsmith, which would be hard to come by. Lots of people know how to shoot, not a lot know the fine mechanics of firearms repair maintenance. Uninspired writer said. Okay, someone probably already said this, but I need to say it because I get so worked up when I think about this. Dysentery would kill more people in an apocalypse than zombies, nuclear fallout, looters, etc. Dysentery, diarrhea, basically, was the #1 killer of people for a long time. Cholera still kills almost 100,000 people worldwide every year. It's almost unheard of in the Western developed world because we have water treatment facilities that keep it out of our drinking water, but it is still around in our ponds, rivers, and lakes. It's still in our sewers and storm drains. If there were ever an apocalypse or apocalyptic scenario where our water and electricity supplies failed, more people would die from uncontrollable diarrhea than anything else. No movies, books ever acknowledge this because it's not a fun, sexy way to die. You die of cholera because your body literally shits out all of the water that you put into it as fast as you can drink. You die slowly over the course of several days of dehydration, too weak to move. Today, if someone gets cholera, it's treated with tons of IV fluids and as much water as they can drink in a desperate attempt to keep them hydrated. Most of the time, they survive. If it were the apocalypse, it would be practically impossible to keep someone with a bad case of dysentery hydrated like that. Uninspired writer said, "The good news is that if you want to avoid this, you just need to purify your water. You can boil it or use purifying drops. The important thing is to just kill all the bacteria and parasites that chill out in natural water sources that we don't even think about. Unfortunately, most people don't keep safe, bottled water around, and don't own a water purifier, so it would be a major killer. TLDR, to avoid dying of diarrhea, make sure you have clean water." Power Skunk 92 said, "Nuclear facilities can be largely autonomous. When people die off, the plants go into an automatic shutdown to prevent generating excess power. The reactors themselves will be largely fine for centuries, unaided. The spent fuel, on the other hand, requires active cooling, often in the form of pools of refrigerated water to lower the temperature of the fuel rods until they can be safely handled. When that active cooling stops, the cooling ponds will start to heat up and boil away. The rods, still far too hot to handle, will catch fire and burn. Every nuclear plant has these cooling pools since the spent fuel rods can't be shipped until they've cooled to safe levels. There are over 500 nuclear power plants in the world today. Within a few years, at most, the world will be facing over 500 radioactive wildfires. Fires that will burn for decades." Shamelessly Plugged said, "Diabetes seems to be the only chronic illness ever thought about, usually in the setting of a dependent child. Thyroid medicine, the most widely prescribed medicine in the US. Anyone with a chronic disease that requires regular medication is going to be an unpleasant death where they have a poor quality of life and won't be able to contribute much. COPD, heart failure, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, psoriatic arthritis, polyangiitis W granulomatosis, for instance. No more CPAPs for anyone. People with transplants reject the organs. HIV becomes a death sentence, and may spread more insidiously. In fact, everyone does raping and pillaging as part of the apocalypse and no one gets syphilis, chlamydia, gonorrhea. Vaccines and vaccine-preventable illness return. Diarrhea is a major killer in the third world. With no good food supplies, food poisoning and other foodborne illnesses become more significant with associated mortality. Infant and maternal mortality goes up." Stabbity Stab Stab said, "If I'm wrong somewhere, please correct me. Sorry in advance, English isn't my first language. Allergies, especially strong ones. Not only they can make spring a frickin' minefield, but they also reduce the amount of safe food you can eat. I'm allergic to apples, for crying out loud. Allergies, kinda like diseases, come and go. You can literally develop an allergy at any moment, often realizing it when you trigger it. Harder access to vitamins. When you hit that post-apo, you need to remember that not only you have to scavenge for food, but also make sure that you won't hit critical low on any of them, because the consequences will be harsh. So you won't have to just look for any food, but often a specific food due to vitamins. If it's still too easy, add on top of that previously mentioned RNG allergies. Forget about vitamins and pharmacy drugs. In cases of zombie-like apocalypses, you won't find a gun just lying there on the ground. Some of my favorite happen in God-blessed USA, where access to firearms isn't the most difficult. Where I live, Poland, the statistics say there is 1/3 of a gun per 100 people. And I know, there are productions where protagonists don't walk around, armed to teeth, but the only ones that come to my mind have their universe specifically made that shooting a gun would be either extremely inefficient, The Bird Box, or suicidal, The Silence in a Quiet Place. That's kind of a reason why I love movies like Train to Busan. D. Allen Bear said, "Always the sheer scale of tasks is distorted to gloss over the fact that surviving collapse long-term without a community requires far more time labor than you have. Food, for example, you need far more area and far more time and far more labor to make far less food than you require, So you'll have to deplete stores or ecologies, which run out. Every other survival task is similar. It is possible to do any of those things, even easy to do them, but when enough tasks essential to life fall to a small enough community, it's not possible to keep up. Stories otherwise have insane survivorship bias and are almost always about short-term stints. You need a ridiculously unlikely amount of resources or already bountiful land all to yourself to even have a chance to survive long enough easily enough to have enough excess labor to invest the work needed for the long term. The problem overlooked in apocalyptic movies TV shows that could kill you is that even the survivors are doomed unless a big enough community kickstarts quickly. Shadows in Time said, without good medical care and hygiene, life expectancy would greatly shorten from diseases spreading or infections, and no lawn care or spraying for mosquitoes or other wildlife would get out of control and create more spreading of illnesses, especially with tall grass everywhere as a perfect hiding spot, breeding areas for insects, reptiles, especially poisonous snakes. Also, massive flooding of cities that are overdeveloped from too much concrete, because the water will no longer be pumped out and have nowhere to go, leading to structure failure as water overflow destroys the foundations, crashing 1,000s of buildings downwards, but that could take decades to hundreds of years. Cloud said, the apocalyptic fiction book Earth Abides does a really good job of covering pretty much all of the calamities that will ensue if most of the world's population died. It's pretty much the entire premise, and the author does a really good job of thinking about all the problems that will arise over a long-term absence of civilization, like wildfires and pests. People think that California wildfires are a new phenomena due to climate change, but it's been that way for a long time and was much worse before humans populated the area and started forest management with controlled burning. Most of California's current problem is from bad forest management. Pests will have a huge food source, and without people keeping them controlled in warehouses and grocery stores, rats, ants, roaches etc. will get out of control. Also, rats will become very dangerous as they dwindle the food supply down and will start eating each other and anyone that gets close. Doodle said, I'm worried about the nuclear power plants that would melt down without the appropriate people managing them. Also, sustaining a balanced diet, particularly in colder climates. Also, basic healthcare. Like people get hurt in movies and like. Don't suffer infections unless it's a plot point. Also, our general lack of skills in a survival situation as a society. We'd have to go back quite a bit to be competent in many of the skills that we've gotten past in society. Like, swinging a hammer actually takes skill, hand-eye coordination. Chopping wood. Growing food in a garden. It's totally different doing it because you can, and doing it because you have to. Snow Eagles 3302 said, this may be a bit hyper-specific, but I have seen way too many apocalypse pregnancy storylines that focus on the emotional drama caused by the pregnancy whilst ignoring the fact that being pregnant in a near-starvation situation is going to cause serious health problems for the mother and the baby. This is also ignoring the possibility of giving birth in a situation where there is no doctor, no painkillers, no antibiotics, heck, probably no fresh water. Even assuming that there are no complications during the birth, like the baby being in an odd position and getting stuck or the placenta not fully detaching, that is still so much stuff that could cause serious problems. There is a reason childbirth used to be one of the main killers of women. But our plucky hero with no medical training will be able to deliver the baby just fine.